certainly went through the school of hard knocks. So a quick review here then on last week. And we did talk about, I mentioned that 1 Samuel 6:6, which I thought was interesting. I never really had noticed that before. How when the Philistines took the ark and put it in the Dagon temple, and then all the plagues hit. And finally, the Philistines went to their priests and they said, what should we do? And they said, well, remember, and this is 300 years previous, remember what their God did to the Egyptians and how they crossed the Red Sea. And this was without the internet. This was out without the daily news, that. But 300 years, if you think back in our history, 300 years, what was that? I mean, we do know that because we had history books, but I'm not sure how literate the people were. It was this word of mouth. But, and then Numbers 15, we finished up that. It wasn't really much of things to talk about, but it talked about the keeping of the Sabbath. It talked about, which I thought, the sins of ignorance, how to offer a sacrifice for that is different. It's still a sin, but when people are ignorant, there is a different sacrifice for it. So I just thought that, having that little special category is important. There still had to be a sacrifice for it though. Just like people that say, well, what about those that never heard? Well, they're still responsible for their sins, even though they were ignorant of some things. We talked about the blue threaded tassels that rabbis will wear, that Jews will wear, Hasidic Jews. And it's to remind them, the blue is to remind them who they belong to. And that's what God always was emphasizing to them. Remember, I chose you. Not because you were great, but because I chose you. And you are to be a witness to the whole world. And that was to remind them of that they were to be an example. And that would certainly translate to us today. We have to be reminded of who we represent in the world. And our testimony by how we live is a very strong testimony. Okay, chapter 16, and there's these 4 chapters here, all have to do with the priesthood and with the rebellion. There was the 5th murmuring that happened. I guess there were 10. And so there's more to come. And this was important because prominent men and the tribe of Reuben rebelled against God. And this was a planned out. This wasn't just a spontaneous, I don't like what you're doing. No, they planned it out how they were going to approach Moses. And this is on the heels, remember, of Miriam and Aaron, complaining and murmuring about Moses and how God dealt with that. Everybody would have known that. And yet, they had kind of the gall to come and say, you know what, you're not the only guy that's important around here. We're important too. And I'm thinking that when Reuben came, remember Reuben was kind of the debunked firstborn. And the tribe of Reuben probably said, well, we should be getting more than what we're getting because we are the firstborn, even though Reuben screwed up. But it was a big deal. It wasn't just a few malcontents. And then the 3 ones that are always mentioned are Korah, Dathan, and Abram. And mainly Korah. Korah was a Levite. We did talk about, it's interesting that Korah's sons apparently were saved and were not swallowed up. We're going to see a little video clip about that. And because in the book of Psalms, you see, this psalm is from the sons of Korah. So somehow, and we don't have the details, but somehow when Moses said, okay, everybody, if you're with these guys, stay with them. If you're not, you better skedaddle. And probably Korah's wife said, boys, let's go. So, and then they lived on in the tribe successfully, apparently. So it was a jealousy issue, and jealousy always is a root of many problems. You know, and then it leads to covetousness. And Moses' first response was awfully mature, I think. And, you know, he didn't want the deal anyways. You know, he was saying, okay. Yeah. And that started way back in Midian, remember, when God came to him and he said, well, I'm out. No, you're not. Well, I can't speak. Well, Aaron's coming. But he does explain, he lays down his frustrations to God, is what we have to do. And then the rebels are warned. And I thought the interesting little part too, where the guy, the commentator, was saying that they were all on one side of the camp. That they probably had time around the campfires at night to kind of build this up. Are you with me? Yeah. Yeah, I'm not treated well, or whatever. But then the judgment comes, and it's not, saying, well, don't do it again. Yeah, you're not going to do it again. Those guys anyways. And they go into Sheol, which is the place of the dead. So let's I'm going to see, this is, I don't think, copyrighted, so we'll watch this little clip from the same guy that did it before.
Continuing a series on undesigned coincidences in the Old Testament. As a reminder, an undesigned coincidence is a notable connection between two or more accounts or texts that doesn't seem to have been planned by the person or the people giving the account. Despite their apparent independence, the items fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. An undesigned coincidence provides reason to believe that all the statements that contribute to it are truthful. Often the undesigned coincidence can lay between two different accounts, but sometimes the detail lies within a single book. In such circumstances, it's necessary for the connection between the details to be sufficiently obscure enough to render the details independent of one another. That's going to be the case in this example that we look at today. We're going to look at an undesigned coincidence in the book of Numbers. In Numbers 16, we read about a rebellion against Moses. Let's start by reading verses 1 through 3. Now Korah, the son of Ishar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took 250 prominent Israelite men who were leaders of the community and representatives in the assembly, and they rebelled against Moses. They came together against Moses and Aaron and told them, "You've gone too far. Everyone in the entire community is holy and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" So basically they're asking where Moses gets off with this big power trip of his. I mean, he was only chosen by God to deliver Israel from Egypt through 10 miraculous plagues and the parting of the Red Sea, but seriously, who died and made him king? Now hang on with me for just a little bit here. This is going to be like finding scattered puzzle pieces and matching them up, but the punchline will be worth it. In the passage I just read, we're told that there are two main groups responsible for this plot against Moses from two different families. Dathan, Abiram, and On come from the tribe of Reuben. The other party was Korah of the family of Kohath, who were Levites. In a completely different and totally incidental context, we're given an interesting factoid that interlocks with these verses. In Numbers 3:29, we read, "The clans of the Kohathites camped on the south side of the tabernacle." Next, in an unconnected manner, we find in Numbers 2:10 another interesting tidbit that links it all together. Reuben's military divisions will camp on the south side under their banner. If you've ever done a Through the Bible in 1 Year plan, these are the kinds of boring passages that your eyes will just normally glaze over at. But here we learn that the Kohath family and the Reuben family were camped on the same side of the tabernacle. So this makes them both conveniently placed for secretly conspiring together against Moses. This subtle kind of congruity between these three passages that are scattered around in Numbers might easily escape the notice of the reader. The fact that we have to dig somewhat in order to recognize these details is evidence of it being a genuine undesigned coincidence. It would be difficult for an author to produce such a coincidence and then just tuck it away. And if a writer was clever enough to think up of an undesigned coincidence and were able to insert such a thing in the text, it would be of no benefit to them. them if the coincidences are not discovered for generations or was never discovered. There would be a great temptation for the writer to draw attention to the coincidence. That kind of attention drawing is what we would expect from a forger or somebody writing fiction. But there is one more undesigned coincidence here in the story. Numbers 16:25 through 34 tells us how that rebellion turned out. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. It reads, Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. He warned the community, get away now from the tents of these wicked men. Don't touch anything that belongs to them, or you will be swept away because of their sins. So they got away from the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Meanwhile, Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the entrance of their tents with their wives, children, and infants. Then Moses said, this is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and that it was not of my own will. If these men died naturally as all people would, and suffer the fate of all, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something unprecedented, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them along with all that belongs to them, so that they will go down alive to Sheol, then you will know that these men have despised the Lord. Just as he finished speaking all these words, the ground beneath them split open. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them and their household, all Korah's people, all their possessions. They went down alive into Sheol and all that belonged with them. The earth closed over them, and they vanished from the assembly. At their cries, all the people of Israel who were around them fled because they thought, the earth may swallow us too. Yikes. It just isn't safe to mess around with Moses. This very sobering story brings about another undesigned coincidence. Compare this with what we read 10 chapters later. In Numbers 26:9-11, we read, the sons of Eliab were Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. It was Dathan and Abiram chosen by the community who fought against Moses and Aaron. They and Korah's followers fought against the Lord. The earth opens its mouth and swallowed them with Korah when his followers died and the fire consumed 250 men. They served as a warning sign. The sons of Korah, however, did not die. Wait, so what now? Hold on a second. The sons of Korah didn't die? I thought we just read in number 16 that the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, their household, all Korah's people, and all their possessions. Did the writer of Numbers get sloppy and contradict himself? Before we jump to conclusions and play the contradiction card, let's inspect Numbers 16:25-27 a bit more closely. It reads, Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. He warned the community, get away from the tents of these wicked men, don't touch anything that belongs to them, or you will be swept away because of their sins. So they got away from the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Meanwhile, Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the entrance of their tents with their wives, children, and infants. So what exactly is happening here? Well, as a Levite, Korah pitched his camp closer to the tabernacle than the other tribes. The Levites formed 3 sides of an inner square, while the other tribes formed 4 sides of the outer square. So Korah's tent would be some distance away from the dwellings of Dathan and Abiram, both of whom were of the tribe of Reuben. Therefore, it's probable that the sons of Korah lived far enough from the devastation that struck others, a disaster that we know was limited in scope since God gave Moses the commandment to get away now from the tents of these wicked men, don't touch anything that belongs to them or you will be swept away because of their sins. Many translations of verse 32 of Numbers indicate that it was the men who were affiliated with Korah's rebellion that were swallowed up. Whether that means his dependents or those partnering in his rebellion isn't totally clear from the Hebrew wording, but it is clear when we look at the full picture. So in the rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram against Moses, we've seen 2 examples of undesigned coincidences. In the first, we are told that the family of Kohath and the family of Reuben lived on the same side of the tabernacle, allowing them to conveniently conspire against Moses while living there. Then we also have the indirect mention of Korah's sons being alive in Numbers 26, the implied omission in Numbers 16:27 of Korah's sons being present at the place of destruction, and our knowledge of the position of Korah's tent relative to that of Dathan and Abiram. The subtlety and casualness where these seemingly unconnected passages fit together as they do is a mark of accurate history. Thank you so much for watching, and if you found this kind of content helpful, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video.
So a quick review then of that whole story, which I think is a pretty interesting story how God dealt with it. In Watchman Nee's book, he says there's 2 instances of rebellion in Numbers 16. From verses 1 to verse 40, the leaders rebelled. From 41 to 50, the whole congregation rebelled. The spirit of rebellion is very contagious. The judgment of the 250 leaders who offered incense did not bring pause to the whole congregation. They were still rebellious, declaring that Moses had killed their leaders. But Moses and Aaron could not command their earth to open up. It was God who commanded it. Moses could not call down fire to burn up the people. The fire came down from God. Human eyes see only men. They know not that authority comes from God. Such people are so bold that they do not fear, even though they've seen judgment. How dangerous is the lack of knowledge of authority. When the whole congregation assembled, the glory of the Lord appeared. That proved that authority was of God. God came to execute judgment. A plague began, and 14,000 people died of the plague. In the midst of this, Moses' spiritual sense was most keen. Immediately he asked Aaron to take his censer, put a fire off the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them. And Aaron stood, that's a neat verse coming up, and Aaron stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. God could forbear their murmurings in the wilderness 10 times, but he would not allow them to resist his authority. Many sins God can bear and forbear, but rebellion he cannot stand, because rebellion is the principle of death, the principle of Satan. Hence, the sin of rebellion is more serious than other sins. Whenever man resists authority, God immediately judges. How solemn this is. So it's a real, interesting that how God dealt with that so quickly. So, and we're going to finish up 16 here then. So, and Watchman alludes to it here in 16:41 through 42. Now we have the sixth murmuring. Why does somebody read verses 41 and 42 in chapter 16?
The next day, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. "You killed the Lord's people," they said. But when the assembly gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron and turned toward the tent of meeting, suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. Now, this is the next day. They had just seen those leaders get swallowed up in the earth. I mean, it had to be a miraculous thing. It wasn't just a natural sinkhole, and then it closed back up. You would think the fear of the Lord would fall on you pretty hard. But it's so they come, and it says the whole congregation, and they are basically saying, "Hey Moses, why did you kill God's people?" Well, God didn't. Moses didn't kill God's people. It was God. And immediately, I think that's a key word. Immediately, God's glory appears. It's going to be none of this. So, what was happening that night, around the campfires? I think what Watchman Nee is saying, rebellion was contagious. And then more 14,000 die of a plague. And then it says, Aaron ran to make intercession. He's carrying the censers. And the man they rebelled against, it's ironic, is the very same man who came and saved them. They're saying, Aaron and Moses, you're bums, But, think of the heart of both Aaron and Moses, too. To not just kind of walk away and say, good luck. But he didn't. Now, it seems, in our mindset, my mindset, the plague coming and killing 14,000 people, we don't know what kind of a plague it was, but we know that Aaron made intercession there. And it's interesting too, the censers, going back a little bit, the censers that the guys were carrying that were the rebels, Aaron told the priests, pick up those bronze censers. And then they took all of them and they put them all together and molded them into a plate that would go on the altar. So it was kind of a reminder of what, what happened, hopefully, anyways. Didn't go real far though, apparently. So then chapter 17 is another real interesting, and this is where God is going to say, okay, we're going to settle this matter once and for all. We're going to really show everybody in a visual form. They were probably visual learners. I don't think they were auditory learners because they weren't hearing.
I think they were learning at all.
Yeah, right. And so let's read chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. Somebody's got that.
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, and get from them a rod for each father's household, 12 rods from all their leaders, according to their father's households. You shall write each name on his rod, and write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi, for there is one rod for the head of each of their father's households. You shall then deposit them in the tent of meeting in front of the testimony where I meet with you. And it will come about that the rod of the man whom I choose will sprout. Thus I shall lessen from upon myself the grumbling to the sons of Israel who are grumbling against you. Moses therefore spoke to the sons of Israel, and all their leaders gave him a rod apiece for each leader according to their father's households, 12 rods, with the rod of Aaron among their rods. So Moses deposited the rods before the Lord in the tent of the testimony.
Now, remember back in Egypt, took Aaron's rod, or Moses' rod, I think it was Aaron's rod, and in the court of Pharaoh, and he threw it down and became a snake. Now the Pharaoh's wizards, they also had rods and they threw it down. They were snakes, but Aaron's rod ate their snakes. Derek Prince always would say about that, he says, he always thought it was kind of funny. All those priests, other priests, they went home without their rod. and you wonder if Aaron's rod got a little bit bigger. But, so Aaron's rod or staff played an important part in God's plan to lead Israel. In ancient Israel culture, a rod was a symbol of authority. Shepherds used rods to guide and correct their flocks. When God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he demonstrated his power by performing a miracle using Moses' rod. God also chose Moses' brother to perform miracles with his own rod. Aaron's rod was the one that turned into a snake, okay? And when Egyptians' magi also turned their staffs into snakes, the snakes had been, Aaron's rod swallowed theirs up. And it was Aaron's rod that God used to turn the water of Egypt into blood. And it was Aaron's rod that summoned the plagues and the gnats. After Moses and Aaron had led Israel, God set apart Aaron and his sons as priests. Levites were to minister to the Lord in the tabernacle, offer sacrifice. Okay, so what we're going to see here is what happened to this. So they put them in the tabernacle before the ark. And the deal was, okay, we're going to have a little experiment here. There's a control. Okay, all of them are going before the ark. And we're going to see, they all are under the same conditions, same humidity, same place, same one light. And we're going to see what happens. And so everybody's thinking, yeah, okay. It reminds me of Elijah on Mount Carmel. Okay, Baal worshipers. We're gonna have a contest here too. We're gonna build 2 altars. We're gonna see which one fire falls down on. Everybody said, okay, that's fair. So you have a little picture of what happened. And it was more, I think, interesting. It's more than just buddy. Let's see. Here's the button that Aaron shot here. We don't have a commercial on it.
Can't go? Do this. Fast. Right? Nope.
The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and get 12 staffs from them, one from the leader of each of their ancestral tribes. Write the name of each man on his staff. On the staff of Levi write Aaron's name, for there must be one staff for the head of each ancestral tribe. Place them in the tent of meeting in front of the ark of the covenant law, where I meet with you. The staff belonging to the man I choose will sprout, and I will rid myself of this constant grumbling against you by the Israelites." So Moses spoke to the Israelites, and their leaders gave him 12 staffs, one for the leader of each of their ancestral tribes, and Aaron's staff was among them. Moses placed the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the covenant law. The next day Moses entered the tent and saw that Aaron's staff, which represented the tribe of Levi, had not only sprouted but had budded, blossomed, and produced almonds. Then Moses brought out all the staffs from the Lord's presence to all the Israelites. They looked at them, and each of the leaders took his own staff. The Lord said to Moses, "Put back Aaron's staff in front of the ark of the covenant law, to be kept as a sign to the rebellious. This will put an end to their grumbling against me, so that they will not die." Moses did just as the Lord commanded him. The Israelites said to Moses, "We will die. We are lost. We are all lost. Anyone who even comes near the tabernacle of the Lord will die. Are we all going to die?"
Well, it did install at least a temporary fear of the Lord. Worked for that day anyways. So, you know, it seems kind of weird, doesn't it? I mean, and how did they know who's, I mean, I guess their names were written on each one. Yeah, that's mine there. Wait a minute, mine didn't bud. And, you know, it's just as a joke, you know, somebody didn't say, "Hey, who got second place?" So this was proof. And like, God's point in that was, he was hoping that this will put an end to the grumbling, that more would not die. He was trying to warn them again. This is important. And like Watchman Nee says, rebellion is something that God will deal with, because going back even to before time, when Satan rebelled against God, God dealt with Satan then, and he's got a future in hell. That's what hell was made for. So, but it's interesting, not only did it bud, but it blossomed. And it produced all. And he wondered, did they eat almonds then, or what? You know? But then that was put in the ark, which is, you know, I don't know how big that staff was, but it kind of, you know, changes your mindset of how big the ark was. I don't know, or if it was foldable, or like those canes that you can hand out, you can fold. I don't think so, but it was, remember, to start with, it was a dead piece of wood. It wasn't alive at all. It wasn't freshly cut. I mean, you can cut some wood and it might blossom. It might blossom for a day or so. But Hebrews 5:4 says that it was evidence that Aaron was called. Now, some people have, you know, made an analogy to the New Testament in that it's a symbol of resurrection. And Jesus is our great high priest, and he was resurrected, and he is for us today. He is alive. That You know, I mean, I don't think they were thinking back then, oh yeah, this is symbolic of the coming Messiah dying on the cross and resurrecting. But there was a lot of things in the Old Testament that they didn't understand that we understand because of the New Testament today. So verses 9 through 10 in chapter 17, Aaron's rod was kept as evidence of God's confirmation of Aaron. Now, we've talked a lot about Aaron. He was no gem. He was a fallen man that had a lot of problems. A lot of problems with, being firm, really sticking to something. We saw that over and over again. But yet God chose him. And, Moses prayed for him. I bet there was more than once that Moses was praying for Aaron. Even in that situation which we're going to review in just a minute about Miriam and Aaron. Aaron was kind of the tag-along. He didn't, yeah, I guess you're right, type of thing. It was Miriam that was really behind it. So there's 3 items in the ark. Anyone remember what the 3 items were in the ark then?
Manna.
Yep, the jar of manna.
And the law.
Yep.
Broken
Temple.
covenant,
And what?
the broken covenant.
Yeah, and the Bible doesn't say that specifically, but that's what the rabbi tradition was saying, that Aaron had them all pick up the broken pieces and put them in a bag and put them also in there. And whenever they carried the ark, it rattled, and that reminded them how they had broke the 10 Commandments. Yeah, but
The marble in the ash tree.
what was that?
Marble in the ash tree.
Yeah. So Aaron's rod, 10 Commandments, and manna. Now that's what it was in there. I think later in the Bible, it doesn't have all of those. And of course, there's a big mystery as to what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. And of course, we see that in some movies, but that's not to be relied on. There is the theory that the Queen of Sheba's son stole the ark, and then that there was. You wonder sometimes in Herod's temple, was an ark there in the Holy of Holies? I don't know. It doesn't say. Herod's temple wasn't really, blessed by God in some ways. Not like Solomon's temple or Zerubbabel's temple later on. So, I find it funny here too. Aaron had to find a new rod. What do you mean I don't get my back? That was my favorite. Made out of mahogany or whatever.
I think Aaron was an example of God's grace.
Yes,
Definitely.
definitely. Yeah. And, we read that one passage where later on, I think in Deuteronomy, where Moses is recounting after the gold calf incident. And he said, God wanted to kill him. Because we were wondering about that. How did he get off so easy? Well, he didn't get off easy, but Moses interceded for him. As a good little brother should.
That's what we have the Holy Spirit for.
That's why we have the Holy Spirit to intercede for us. That's right. And in many ways, we're all like Aaron. Okay. So let's look at chapter 18. Once again, this is one that doesn't have a lot of great depth to go into, but it talks about what the Levites were responsible for. And they should remember that Korah was a Levite. When they take responsibility, they have to remember by God's grace that they're still around. Korah was a Levite. He's not there anymore. And then God goes on in this chapter 18 to delineate all the jobs that they're to do. I mean, it was very concrete, sequential. This is your job. This is your job. I mean, it's analogous maybe to, the New Testament church, where you have different gifts. So some were to, take down the tent. Some were to carry the ark. Some were to carry the bronze. And I think it's interesting. I think they said once that Levites, not sure if it's in this passage, were to retire at age 50. Doesn't mean they were stopping doing anything, but they weren't to be carrying the stuff and everything like that, which I thought was interesting. Because it seems in some ways that they were longer livers back then than today.
I can keep track of all this. Yeah, it's like, because it talks about when an animal is killed and what you can eat, what you can't. You gotta sprinkle the blood, you can't sprinkle the blood there, you can't do this, but you can do this, and
Right?
it's crazy. It's
Yeah.
all this stuff, how do we keep track of it?
And they didn't have computers. Yeah.
A big list.
Right, and so a lot of it was oral tradition passed on by the leaders of each section of the Levites. So, and then remember, they were not to get a parcel of land. They were to get sanctuary cities within each of the other tribes. And we mentioned earlier too how Jacob foretold that they would not have land. And it was mainly because Levi, the original Levi, he was kind of a jerk, at least to start with. And he was one that, was behind the mastermind behind killing all the men of Shechem, tricking them.
They were surviving because of the food they could eat out of it.
Right, everybody had to give, the 10% of tithing.
So, yeah, there'd be all these animals that would be sacrificed, but they eat some of them or all of them or none
Right.
of them or whatever.
And
But it's
we're-
not like their families also were getting that
Yeah, yeah. So they were provided for.
somewhere.
And then which cuts of meat you could have, and, right, and not the fat. So then chapter 19 talks about, and this is, I know people have written a lot about this and the symbolism of it. I don't quite understand it, but the red heifer. And this is the first and only time that a female animal is mentioned as a sacrifice. Usually it's a male goat, a male lamb, or a ram. And even J. Vernon McGee says this is an unusual ordinance. And it was part of a purification rite that you would do that to purify. They would keep the ashes of a red heifer, and then they would mix it with water and they'd sprinkle it on people to purify them. Boy, I'm sure glad that we don't live under the law with all of the sacrifices. Like you were saying, think of keeping track of all those things. Yeah.
I figured it was 50, you had a lot of work
Yeah.
going through the same
Right.
thing and cutting up time.
Were you for a retirement mandatory at 50?
It's,
You're ready
it's,
for it.
it's crazy, when you think about, here that they had to, take cedar wood and the scarlet material and cast it in the midst of the burning pepper, in the middle of the burning pepper. So the thing was on fire somehow or another.
Yeah, you're,
And then they should wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterwards come to the camp, and the priest will be unclean till evening.
right,
And they had to keep all the uncleans and cleans and when you did it and
right.
keep it all straight.
Yeah. So they burn it completely, it sounds like. Then they would gather up the ashes from it, and that would be symbolic. But I mean, I don't understand that. I mean,
Handling of ashes, they were unclean for a week after my
Yeah.
this exploding.
yeah.
I had to wash the clothes.
Right. So the red heifer, so a little, factoid there, the only female animal mentioned as a sacrifice. Okay, we're gonna just go through chapter 20 here, at least start it here. So chapters 14 through 20, which we've been going through, are the only chapters that actually deal with those 40 years in the wilderness. So it's really a small snapshot of what happened during those 40 years. There was a lot of dead time, I think, in those 40 years, sitting around the campfire, waiting to, because what were they waiting for? Everybody that had been 20 years or older was dying. I mean, you'd think there had to be, 2 million graves in the wilderness because of that.
Did they realize that they were gonna all have to die, that whole generation, that they were waiting for, did they realize what their fate was?
I think so. I think Moses said that he repeated what God said because of what you did. Everybody 20 and older except, and they made that exception, Joshua and Caleb. And even, as we're going to get to, even Moses didn't make it. Aaron didn't make it. And you wonder if Moses hadn't, hit the rock, if he would have made it. Seems like he would have. And Sunday I'm going to be talking about Joshua. And one of the things that hits me is, how did he not become bitter during those 40 years? I have to wait 40 years because of you guys. Caleb too. But they didn't. They didn't hold a grudge.
Or prideful?
Or prideful, saying, oh yeah, we're making it. Yeah. Good. But I'm sure Caleb and Joshua, their friendship developed even stronger during those 40 years. They encouraged each other. Because they had dreams. I mean, they were normal men. It's like the dads coming back from World War II. They had dreams and they wanted to get on with it. And that's why we have the baby boomers. So, and J. Vernon McGee mentioned, he says that when we're out of God's will, there's not much to report. So we have, some interesting incidences, that same old story, second verse. But, and then verse 1, where are they back at? In chapter 20.
Out in the desert.
Which area, which is significant?
Which then,
Yeah. Yep, they're at Kadesh Barnea. Where were they when the 12 spies went out? They were at Kadesh Barnea. They made full circle. They've been wandering, but now they're back. Square one. This is where you were 40 years ago. Did you learn your lesson from 40 years ago? Well, this time they kind of did for a while. So at this point too, Miriam dies. Now, if you look there, it's interesting, there's no days of mourning set aside, and there's no eulogy recorded by Moses. That's kind of sad. I mean, when Aaron died, they set aside time of mourning. When Moses died, they set aside time of mourning. Not for Miriam.
She was a woman.
Well, that might have part of it, but she was a pretty important woman, but I think she was kind of a pain, at least at the end. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. We can only speculate why. Maybe it's just not recorded. Maybe they did. But she did play, like we've said before, important part of the story. She watched baby Moses. And she was leading the women into the celebration after crossing in the Red Sea. They all took their tambourines and went out. And we kidded, why did everybody keep their tambourines? But now verses 2 through 3. Like John said, here we go again. Can you read that, John? Verses 2 and 3 in chapter 20.
Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. And the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died with our brother before the Lord.
Wow. So did they really learn? No. So here we go again, and this is the 7th murmurings. Verses 4 through 5, like I said, really? Did they not? They should have at least had the oral tradition of what happened previously when they were out of water. Moses hit the rock and water came out. So what's verse 6? What was Moses and Aaron's response?
They got the glory of God on their faces.
They got on their faces and they said, Lord, we've had it.
Help us, please.
Yeah. And so God's glory appears again. Once again, God's glory steps in and protects them.
I'd be surprised if they said, Lord, you can smack them now.
Yeah. Well, maybe deep in the recesses he was thinking that. But then the very sad story, verses 7 through 11. Moses sins. And this is the one that keeps him out. And, humanly speaking, you think, oh Lord, after all he's been through, he's not going to make it. But to whom much is given, much is required. And he should have known better. He was angry. Moses always had an issue with anger. We saw that from the very beginning when he killed the Egyptian, hid his body. And so he goes to the rock, and God says, what did he say?
He said, speak to the rock.
Speak to the rock. And Moses was so angry, he took his staff and he hit it. Struck it twice.
He was quite verbal.
Yeah.
Listen now, you rebels.
Yeah. Which was justified.
Yeah.
And now it's interesting, he disobeyed, but God still honored him. The water came out to feed all. Remember, we talked about, enough water to feed all of the cattle, all of the 2 million people or so, the sheep. They needed a lot. They weren't going to go to Walmart and buy some bottled water. But it was very clear, and like you mentioned, Moses is really ticked off. He says, and the other mistake he says, must we bring water from the rock? That wasn't true either.
He didn't believe that.
So he hits it twice. Now, the symbolism behind this is that Christ is the rock, and that's given as an analogy, a clear analogy in other parts of the Bible. Christ is the rock. He was already struck once on the cross. You don't strike him again. You don't put Christ back up on the cross. His work was complete when he died that one time. You don't do it again. You don't even think of that again. Now, we can have great sympathy for Moses, but And I certainly do, after all that he's been through. I mean, after surviving that 40 years in the wilderness, coming to Kadesh Barnea again, you're at the edge and you're looking in, you know, and Moses asked one more time, and we're going to get to that next time. He asked one more time, God, can I go in? God says no. And he dies on the mountain. And who buried him? God buried him.
So this was at the end of 40 years, where God had supplied all their needs. Now, just before they were going to go in to Canaan, this happened.
Right. And then, you know, Moses does die, Joshua takes over, and we're going to talk about how Joshua really made a command decision. Okay, we're sending 2 guys in. And we're not going in to see if it's a good land. We know it's a good land. We're just going to do some scouting here, and that, you know, the mistake probably was that it wasn't going to be a democratic issue now. It wasn't going to have the 12 spies vote and get voted down 10-2. They weren't going to go another 40 years in the wilderness. We're not going that way again, you know. What's the old saying? If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, it's insanity. You know, if you keep doing the same thing, getting the same results, you know, that's insanity. So they weren't going to do that. And expecting a different result, right? So we learned about Moses or Aaron's rod that budded, and I don't know, did it keep its buds and flop in the ark? I mean, or did it dry up finally?
I think I read one time that it buzzed all the while
Yeah,
at the Ark of Active.
yeah, which was a miracle, obviously. Yeah,
And then,
right. And being symbolic of Christ's resurrection. Take a dead piece of wood and you're resurrected.
which found another misunderstanding of the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right. Yeah, we can't take that too literally. Well, thank you for coming, and we'll have one more next week, and then we'll take a hiatus for the summer. And probably get into Deuteronomy to start next fall. Okay.
You bet.